Let me stay with you. You're asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. You're asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. You're asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. You're asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't up to, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you. But do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I cannot do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can say we can't do, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't help you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. You're not, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. Being asking you just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say I can't love you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about you, your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. We can still look at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life. But tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't say looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. Let me stay with you. In us, can you? Just one night. I don't know about your life, but tell me 'cause we still have time. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. I think of you every moment. I can't stop looking at you, but do you feel the same, don't you? I think of you every moment. There's nobody else. There's nobody else. There's nobody